right. Good day, class. All right. So today or this week, we're going to cover organizational structure and design and also conflict management in the workplace. All right. So depending on how the organization is designed or set up, right, will have an impact on how the organization performs and how the employees also perform. Okay. So when we talk about design, we're just trying to figure out how do we set up, the culture, and how do we set up the structure and that, the organization can achieve its goals and its mission. Okay. Um, as far as structure goes, we're talking about, the processes, the system of tasks, really the hierarchy and how things are connected so we can physically see them, right, and have an idea of how all that stuff is connected. All right. All right. So of course, every company has an org chart, and on the org chart, it kind of lays out CEO, COO, all the positions that the company has, right? And not much detail, just basically is labeling the position, the titles, and then possibly who's actually in the titles, okay? And so gives you an idea of how the company's set up as far as the structure, all right, and you can see who's in charge and who you need to talk to and who controls what, who's in charge of certain areas within the department or within the company, and also who reporting chain, right, and figure out okay who needs to talk to who or who talks to who, right, and that kind of thing. Right, it gives you an idea of who's who and how the kind of the flow of information goes, and how decisions are being made and then sent down or maybe sent up. Mhm. So different kind of ways you can set up the structure in an organization. All right. So if you do a division of labor way, basically you are, um, you know, splitting the work up to where you have it where each department or section or um, area is focused on which employees specialize or generalize, right? So you have employees that are, have specific skill sets and that's what they do, or you have employees that are, kind of general support, and those guys support the whole, organization by supporting just one department or whatever the case may be. Span of control, we're talking about the number of people reporting directly to an individual, right? To see, okay, who is in charge of who, okay, and how many people are they in charge of, and who reports to who. And this gives you an idea of, okay, how much, how many departments or how many different things one person is kind of responsible for. Um, Also, it gives you an idea of how many evaluations the person may not be writing, and in general, just how many people are they overseeing, right? How many people are they in charge of? The hierarchy really talks about who has authority over others, right? The formal authority, the positional authority, and so based on the structure, you can see that who's boss, right? The CEO answers to the board, right? But the board, itself is made up of people that are elected to the board that are not typically part of the company. Some will be outside the company and not even in the same industry at times. But then when you look at the hierarchy, you can see also um, who's in charge of the marketing and how that works and who has to talk to who or get permission for certain things in which to figure out what they need to do. Excuse me. When we talk about formalization, we're looking at really the rules and procedures that are kind of codified and accessible by the employees. And so those particular things that are standard within the organization, kind of rules of conduct. Okay, and so you can see, hey, if there's an issue or problem, is there a procedure for it? Is something written down that we can follow that would give us an idea of how to approach this problem or how to approach a particular situation. Centralization, it really talks about where is the power concentrated, right? Um, who has you know the most decision making ability or authority, or is it more decentralized in nature where there's a lot of people that have control, right? But we're looking at what's the central hub or the degree to which power and decision making authority is concentrated. Okay. And so we're looking at centralization. We're just looking at, okay, who has the authority to make decisions and to influence the organization in such a way. All right, here's an example, right, of a structural org chart. Okay, very simple. This is more of a really just really simple. Doesn't have much to it for this example, right? Narrow span of control, right? So when we talk about narrow span of control, uh, we're talking about here where there's just very few managers, right? Every level is pretty flat, right? It's not a bunch of stuff happening, right? So you can see each person here. If you start the associates, there's three associates per every manager, and every manager just reports to the vice president. The vice president has two managers that report to him. Each vice president reports to the president, right? So you can see at every level it's either two or three. So it's two vice presidents, two managers, three associates, right? So you can tell from this that there isn't necessarily a whole lot of like a huge um, span of control, and that the manager can probably handle two or three associates, and it's ran pretty well. Right, it's pretty efficient. They're probably very intimate as to what's going on down here, and they know all the details, right, as far as the managers go, and which gives the managers the ability to really provide the vice president with a lot of detail. Okay, which in turn goes to the president. The president gets a lot of information, detailed information uh, because of the small numbers down here, right, which are really manageable. And that's really what you want. You want the numbers to be manageable if you have a narrow span of control, and it kind of just goes up, right, instead of out, right? As you start to get into bigger corporations and bigger companies, this will start to go out more this way. Everything will start to kind of spread um, horizontally, vice vertically, right? And so um, this is just an example. Now you have a wide span of control, right? As I was saying, it goes further out, okay? Because now the president has one, two, three, right? Um, um, Folks, right? But at the same time, here you have more associates. Okay, he has more associates here, or more managers, I should say here, because this vice president, he has more managers here, and each manager not really knowing how many people are under him, but this is a lot of managers: one, two, three, four, five, six, seven managers under each vice president. Okay, and so you have to look at it. Okay, there's 21 managers that basically the president, 21 managers. Um, 21, yeah, managers, three vice presidents, and the president up here is controlling it. And it's flat for the most part, and it's more of a decentralized type system because there aren't many levels in which you have to go to get to the top, right? So basically, one level here, the managers, boom, the vice president, then it's boom. So it's pretty, there's not too much red tape, and it's pretty direct, right? So this really lends itself to speed in decision making, right? And not necessarily having to wait too long to find out what's going on. If you ask for something or something was sent up, this is pretty quick. The only reason it might be slow is because if all seven managers here decide to ask for a certain thing and it gets pushed up to the vice president, same thing here. It gets pushed up to the vice president, it gets pushed up to the vice president. So it may cause a clog for the president because if the vice president have to go up and ask the president for guidance or their input or the decision on something, then the president's going to probably be considering all 21 of them. But the vice presidents, hopefully they're doing their job, will consolidate and give the president a comprehensive uh, report as to what it is that they're looking to do, all the salient points of their particular mission or what they like to get accomplished. All right, we're talking about mechanistic structure, right? We're talking about very rigid bureaucracy, right? And you can hear it in the names, mechanical, right? It's very set in stone. There's certain rules and parameters that you have to follow, right? And so there's not much, leeway in the decision making. Um, all decisions really come from the top. Um, and hierarchical communication, meaning that the communication, all the directives on the direction usually come from the top and then trickle down. Okay. Um, so, and it says this is a point here, slow to capitalize on new opportunities. And that's because the fact that it's so mechanical and there's so many rules that you have to check these boxes before it has to go to the next step. So because of that, it's a slow process, and if it's a slow process, they will more likely miss out on opportunities that are very rapid or very dynamic in nature. And so a lot of times mechanical structures or mechanistic structures don't really bode well when it comes to capitalizing on new opportunities. Uh, So the organic structure is a little bit more flexible and decentralized, right? Open lines of communications, right? They focus on adaptability, faster response to market and competitive change, and may increase job satisfaction and commitment. Here we're talking about an organization that's very personal, okay? That is, not necessarily, not that they don't have rules and guidelines, it's just that they're more open to, okay, what's the situation called for? And then based on the situation, we'll make the decision, we'll definitely use the guidelines that we have as rudder steer, but at the same time, we want to be able to kind of see how the scenario plays out, and then we'll make a decision. You also have open communication channels where a subordinate could probably pop their head into the president's office and say, hey, sir, I was thinking this, right? Instead of having to go through that manager supervisor, they may give their manager supervisor a courtesy and say, hey, I'm going to go talk to the president about this particular issue. And the manager supervisor go, fine, no problem, right? Because they have an open communication, but you have to at least give the manager a courtesy and the vice president a courtesy, however far you're going to go up, a courtesy and say, I'm going to go speak to such and such about a particular thing. And the manager will be fine. And what it does is it allows the manager to have more time to do other things, right? As long as you keep them in the loop, they don't necessarily need to be involved in every little thing. Okay, they just need to know the important points and be able to articulate that to the boss when the time is necessary. When they just have meetings that involve the senior level people and that kind of thing, on a specific project. All right. Um, One key point that they have here is that it may increase job satisfaction and commitment, and that's because you in this kind of structure, you have more of a say so. You have the ability to go talk to the people that make decisions um, directly, and you can pitch your ideas, pitch your thoughts, and then get an answer kind of somewhat quickly, right? It could, in a pretty expedient manner, and then that leads to you feeling like, okay, I'm being heard, I'm being listened, which leads to job satisfaction and you being committed to the company, because now you feel like, okay, I have a vested interest in what's going on because my idea that I pitched was accepted and I got the green light to go ahead and move forward with it, right? And so people are always looking for, autonomy to some degree and empowerment. And that's what that really leads to is when you have that kind of structure. The bad thing about this is that you have to have everyone on board, in the sense that they all have to be open and ready to, like, talk to each other and keep each other in the loop. If you don't keep each other in the loop and don't, give the courtesy of briefing the person that you're skipping or jumping ahead of, then they'll be in the dark. And the last thing you want is your manager or your boss to be in the dark about something and then gets blindsided by their boss, but from something that you mentioned, right? And so you don't want that. You want to be, you know, um, courteous and give whoever you're surpassing, um, the opportunity to hear what you have to say, and also let them know, like, hey, I'm gonna go talk to such and such, not in a negative way. I'm just gonna go talk to the president and pitch my the other vice president and pitch this particular plan that I had, with that person's okay, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that you have is people that may take, um, you know, things upon themselves and make decisions on their own, without having gone through the chain and getting it kind of vetted, right? And so because of the the ability to kind of make your own decisions, and it's not as centralized. You don't have to check so many boxes, so you can take action without actually getting an approval, and that isn't always the most appropriate thing to do, right? Good initiative, sometimes bad judgment. Okay. And so you want to make sure that, again, you don't do things without talking to someone else that's senior to you, or who's your supervisor, your boss, right? All those are decentralized structure. You really want to make sure that you get the green light from people before you take action on things that they may not be okay with, and they may not necessarily align with the goals and objectives of the company. All right, so here we have an excerpt from the Nordstrom's Employee Handbook. Okay, and everyone's familiar with Nordstrom. Nordstrom's one of the more popular or well-known uh, retailers. Okay, more of a high-end retailer. But this is the Employee Handbook, where they kind of lay out a couple of things that they like to have, right. And it says here, its new employee received a handbook for a while that just consisted of 75 words, right? Simple, nothing fancy. Right? Because you look at a handbook now, it's the 20, 30 pages, and it's full of all kind of stuff, right? But um, this is what Nordstrom had, for a while, okay? And it just says, welcome to Nordstrom, kind of gives you an idea of, what the mission and the goals are and objectives, right? And you can see number one goes to provide outstanding customer service. All right. Now, what goes into that is a different story. All right. This is what you do day to day. But our goal and our mission is to provide outstanding customer service, right? Set both your personal and professional goals high, right? So here we're talking about professional development, right? Personal and professional development. Um, and the company also lets you know that they believe in you, right? All in just one paragraph, right? So it's really interesting how they did that, and it's effective because one, I'm not reading a whole big handbook. Two, I get to know right off the bat and the jump what the company is looking for me to do, what they, their confidence in me, and they also are showing that they care about me as far as my own personal, professional goals or objectives, right? And then the number one rule, right, is use good judgment in all situations. There will be no additional rules. And so again, good judgment always outweighs everything, right? If you have the opportunity to sit down and really think something through, then you should, right? Um, and that really should be not the catalyst, but the driving force behind all your decision making, right? Good judgment. Also states, don't be afraid to ask your department manager, division general manager, anyone that tell you the truth, any question, anytime, right? Whatever the situation is and how whatever it's related to, don't be afraid to step out and say, hey, you know what, I really want to talk to you about this because um, I'm not really sure about it. I want to make get some clarity on it, or whatever the case may be, right? Don't be afraid to do that. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing to do. Okay. So Nordstrom, that's not too shabby of a you know, uh, employee handbook. Employee handbook nowadays are extremely long, they're lengthy. You have to sign that you acknowledge the handbook, and most people don't read the handbook. And depending on the size of the organization, the handbook could very well be 60 to 100 pages. They tend not to be that long, but some companies do have certain things in the handbook that they need to cover to protect themselves, right? Non-compete clauses and sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, discrimination, all these other policies, relate policies, and all this other stuff. So when Nordstrom's probably did that, probably was a simpler time, right? As compared to now, where things are a little bit more, complicated, and you have to really spell everything out. Because if you don't spell everything out and things are ambiguous, then people tend to take advantage of that and find these loopholes uh, that kind of do work in their they work to their favor when they do misbehave, right? Okay, so now we're looking at these different models. going from mechanistic to organic, right? And you can tell as you start at the top, the rigid bureaucracy, but as you get down to organic structure, it's very loose, right? It's a combination of loosely coupled organic networks. Okay. But you can see here, it goes from rigid bureaucracy down to loosely coupled organic network. You see here kind of the autonomy and the empowerment is increasing as you get more down here. Okay. The ability to make decisions on your own without having to, you know, consult with, management or, having to talk to another department, whatever the case may be. Okay. Which I always advocate for, right? You should always talk to other departments to see how they feel about a certain project or certain thing that's going on because they have an impact on it, right? Just because it's in marketing doesn't mean that the finance department doesn't care or operations doesn't care or HR doesn't care. They all care, right? Even IT, because all those other departments are there to support each other, right? And so no matter, even if you are in marketing, you're going to need IT support, you're going to need money, you're going to need HR support, you're going to need people. And so you have to be able to um, have open lines of communication with all these other departments. But the way it works, as you start to get closer to organic structure, you'll do that, but you will do it in a more informal manner, right? It won't be as formal where there's a lot of boxes to check here. There's probably a lot of paperwork to be filled out. Everything has to be, in a certain format and then, given 2 to 3 days or has a standard time for processing. And then it goes to the next level and then, that kind of thing. Whereas maybe you just go walk in organic structure and say, hey, this is what's going to happen. I'll put it down on paper, but when you're going to get started and do I have your authority to have the green light to do this? And okay, you can do it good. We talked about is a verbal, approval, and you kind of keep moving, um, the way you want to move. So a lot of times these, structures are really based on the leadership, right? And, sometimes they're based on, how the company needs to be ran and the business and industry that you're in. Um, but many times it's on the leader, as to how they want to run their organization. Some leaders are very much, they need to know everything, right? And so because of that, you'll have more of a rigid type, more mechanistic structure because everything needs to be followed up to the president or the top for the decision making, right? And so that person, whoever he or she is, they want to be in the loop about everything, any little decision that's made. And if it's coming up to their level, then it must be important, right? You also, have the leader that is not so much concerned with the day to day and is really involved with, really concerned about the long term vision and are we doing the things we need to do to get to where we need to be long term, right? And that may very much be someone who's more about the organic structure because they're not necessarily worried about what the teams are doing because they realize that the teams and all these little other networks are doing things for the company, right? And so they may want to speed things up and to keep it decentralized because they understand that the more centralized it is, the longer it takes for things to happen. The more likely that we are to miss out on opportunity because we're taking so long with the decision making process, right? Because there are many opportunities that will arise that demand an answer very quickly, right? In a day or two, 24 to 48 hours, you got to decide, not 7 days to 10 days, right? Not everything is like that, but some industries are very much like that. Inherently, the tech industry is very quick, right? And I'm sure that sometimes at some point, decision making has to be very, done very quickly, right? So, you'll have more of an organic structure where it's more fluid, but other organizations may not necessarily roll that way. But I think that based on research and some of the stuff that's out there, and in companies I work for, um, it really is dependent on the leader and how much trust they have in the people that work for them, and many times how much trust they have in themselves and in their ability to kind of absorb all the information and manage all the things that go with what it is they're doing, right? And so, you have to kind of look at it, as to what resources do I have, and how can I best utilize those resources. Okay, so um, what affects or influences, your organizational structure. Okay, of course, your business strategy. All right, how are you going to approach your business? Are you going to be, like Walmart, low cost producer? Or are you going to be like Amazon, where you rely on, or Apple, innovation and speed, that kind of thing, right? The external environment, right? This is where your SWOT E comes in, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats in the external landscape, right? What's happening external to my company, right? The things that I more likely cannot control, right? Um, and if you have an organizational structure that um, is susceptible to a rapidly changing environment, you have to be flexible in your decision making. You have to be flexible in your structure, um, because you have to be able to move with the environment. If you can't move with the environment, you get left behind. All right, and so you think about a company like Blockbuster that's out of business now, right? They didn't move with the environment, and the external environment. You can see that Redbox was coming in, everything was going digital, streaming, and that kind of thing. Blockbuster just figured that, that videotapes were going to be the thing forever. Well, that didn't turn out to really work out for them, right? Again, we've gone way past DVDs and videotapes. Now it's streaming, live content, things in the cloud. You can watch a movie anytime. Just it just totally changed. So um, you have to kind of be aware of your environment. The nature of talent, right? Again, it goes back to what I was saying as far as like, um, if you have confidence in your team and the people that work for you, and you feel that um, that this group of folks can work together efficiently, then you might have more of a tendency to say, you know what, I don't need to have a whole bunch of red tape in how things go. I'm gonna let the folks kind of make the decisions, and so I have really flat to where it's decentralized. And for the most part, if someone needs something done, they can just kind of go to their boss, and their boss can come to me. Right? Quick decision making, again, lends itself to more of a rapid changing environment, but you have a flat structure based on the talent. If you feel that the talent isn't really up to par, the folks that you have in your organization up to par, you're going to have a more bureaucratic structure where you're going to have levels to everything, and everything has to be routed through the entire chain. The military is like that, right? Where you have to take everything has to be routed through a certain level for approval, and then they may get to one level where that person has approval authority. But again, depending on the situation, they need to escalate it to the next level. Okay, and so we have a chain of command, right? But it's tall, it's not short, right? Chain of command is not, in general, the military chain of command is pretty tall for the most part. It's not a lot of, decentralized decision making, unless you are, you know, um, actively involved in some kind of combat, and the situation calls for you to make a decision right then and there. So, but most folks have never really experienced that. And so, for the most part, it depends on the talent and how much trust and confidence the leaders have in their people, right? Um, Organizational size, larger organizations tend to have greater specialization, right? Greater hierarchy and more rules than do smaller firms, right? And that's just because the bigger you are, the harder it is to manage. So you need to make sure that everything is getting done the right way, because you can't necessarily physically examine everything because it's such a big organization. So you need to have structure and have hierarchy, and to where everything gets vetted and pushed up to the appropriate level, so that we are all cognizant and we know what's going on. Okay. I need to know what's going on my 600 man, department, my HR department, right? You have five, six, you have, 50, 60, 70 people that work in HR. You're not going to keep track of them. Okay. You're not going to keep track of what's going on in HR and, succession planning and all this other stuff, right? And so you want to make sure that, you know, you have an appropriate, structure set up based on the size of your organization. Expectation employee behavior, again, that goes back to nature of talent to me. Those two things are tied together, right? If think I have good talent, then I'm expecting a certain behavior. If I think I have not so great talent, I'm expecting this type of behavior. And so, depending on the behavior and the nature of the talent, then I can figure out if I want a centralized or decentralized structure. Okay. Organization production technology. Again, technology is definitely um, a big thing, right? But the flatter structure with the low managerial span of control is most appropriate, right? If you have a unit production that makes custom products, right? Um, unit production makes custom products. So again, that's just saying, hey, I have a flat structure. We're going to, decentralize it and have it to where the associate is going to talk to the vice president or the manager is going to talk to the vice president going to talk to the president, if that if it goes that far. So it might be the vice president, manager, associate, right? Because when you're talking about, unit production or mixed custom products, we're talking about very individualized things that may need decision making uh, process to go quickly, right? Because if we're making something custom, not batch, right, that means that someone specifically has certain criteria that they ask for as far as the customer goes, and we need to meet that particular um, customer's needs. And so maybe decisions to be made, and I can't wait, days, weeks to make a decision, because the longer I wait for the decision to come down, the longer it is I get the product to the person or to the customer, right? And then organizational change, right, influences organizational structure, because as the environment, business strategy change, organizational structures change too, right? So again, when the environment changes, the strategy changes, right? So does the structure, because we have to build structure to meet the environment, as I was talking about Blockbuster, right? And them not having the ability to adapt to the new environment and change the organization structure based on that. If Blockbuster was being smart and being paying attention to what was going on externally, then they would have switched everything up. They would have changed their whole company and just change the department little by little to be more inclined to keep up with the digital age and the technology that was definitely coming, and coming in at a speed that they could see. Okay, it was a long, long, long way down for Blockbuster. It didn't happen just overnight. And so they could see that this thing was coming, and they did nothing about it. But you have to realize that the environment changed, and the business strategies change, right? The things that we want to do are things important, so does the structure. All right, let's look at some production technology. So we look at unit production again. They're just producing in small batches or making one of a kind custom products, right? So we look at unit production. There's specific criteria, and they're usually all different in nature, right? As compared to mass production, where we're producing large volumes of identical products, right? And so you think about, housing development, right? Some of them, all the all these selections are, one of three particular designs, right? And so they kind of all look the same, right? And we're mass producing these houses that look alike, but it helps us to quickly produce the community. Everybody has kind of the same. We buy, we can buy in bulk. So it depends again on your business strategy on which one of these two that you choose, right? Continuous production, right, is when the machines are making the product. and employees just monitor the machines and plan change, right? So basically, it's kind of like making code making some kind of food product where this is a conveyor system and all the machines already set to the specific number of ingredients, how much of those ingredients, and then we're just monitoring the process to make changes for maybe cherry Coke as compared to vanilla Coke or something like that, right? We plan those changes accordingly. Oh, this week we're going to do cherry Coke, right? But then next week we're going to go to vanilla Coke. But it's still making Coke. It's just stopping the process very quickly, making a quick change, and then it's going 24/7, right? 24/7 operation. So that definitely occurs, right? All right. All right, pre-bureaucratic structure, excuse me. Um, that describes organizations that are small in nature, low standardization, low centralization, and mostly one-on-one communication. You're really talking about more of your mom and pop type organizations or something close to um, that type of company, right? Bureaucratic structure normally bigger, right, and have formal labor, division of labor, formal hierarchy, standardization of work procedures. Everything's kind of laid out and has its parameters. You can clearly see who goes where, what goes where, who does what, when it needs to be done, and that kind of thing. Right? Functional structure is just more people with the same, skills, right? Um, or people that use the same kind of resources, and they're all in one department. Okay, so you have a functional department, or a group of, let's just say, within the IT community, right? You have your the guys that do networking. Okay, then you have the guys that troubleshoot. Then you have guys that are software guys. And you have guys that are hardware guys, right? But they all kind of work together, um, um, within that IT department, right? And so that's a functional structure. I have IT department, I have marketing, I have human resources, that kind of thing. All right. So divisional structure is more of a group of folks that are looking at a geographic region. Okay, so the way it's set up is organized around an area, a product, service, or a market. So you may have the jet division at Boeing, or you may have the commercial plane division at Boeing. Okay, so it's really based on um, you know. Um, certain thing, right? It's either geographic area too, right? We have the Western Division or the Eastern Division. Excuse me. The matrix structure is when employees report to both a functional manager and to a project or team product or team. Okay, and so you have a functional manager, but you also have kind of someone who's overseeing a particular uh, you know project, right? So you report to the IT manager, right? Your functional manager, but then you have a team manager or project manager, excuse me, a product team that is in charge of IT for a particular client, right? So they're in charge. They have the Apple account, and the Apple account has their own IT department, right? Or in the case of, like, say, Nike, right? The functional manager, may be in charge of, the guys that design department, but that also they're working on the project manager has the LeBron, sneaker this year. Okay, so that's kind of the matrix structure. Here's an example of how the matrix structure would look like. Okay, so you have the president, right, and then each team, right, is set up with their project leader, and then the research department kind of supports each team in a certain way. The marketing department, same thing, supports them in each way. Production department, finance department. So it's kind of like general support for each of these teams. Right, the marketing department belongs to no one. They just help the teams as things come up. Right, the president's over here and is getting fed information from not only the functional teams, right, but also the project leaders. Okay, And so as the the functional leaders here are doing their job and supporting the different teams, okay, the team leaders are reporting to the president as to how their projects are going, right? And then these particular folks are reporting also to the president, but they're more or less talking on the things that they have going on and who they're supporting, right? All right, so different types of organizational structures. All right, let's look at, okay, team-based structure. Okay, horizontal, vertical team define all part or all of the organization. Right. So really, when it comes down to it, it's about teams and people working in groups. You never, not never, but for the most part, most companies really focus on um, team dynamics and team structures because it helps that you can share resources, um, more, more options and more, thoughts and ideas are produced by teams versus one individual. You have the ladder structure, which is a cross-functional, cross-level sub-teams are formed and dissolved as necessary to complete specific projects and tasks. So really what you have here is a special special purpose team. Okay. They're put together, and broken up specifically for a certain goal. Okay. So we're looking at a team that's going to be working on project X for a year, right? All right, let's assemble the team, get the job done, and then we disassemble the team at the end of the year. That's the ladder structure. The network organization is really a collection of, autonomous units that work as a larger entity, right? And it says using social mechanisms for coordination and control. So basically, they're talking to each other, right? Via email, text, phone, um, however which way they decide, virtual, meetings and all that stuff, right? But they're all on their own, and no one reports to anyone else. They just know that they all have a common goal. So that common goal is what drives them. There will be a representative for each of these autonomous units or firm, and that person will be the conduit of all the information, everything that it is pertinent to them and how the project is going, that kind of thing, right? But you have these different organizations that all come together in support of a particular thing, right? Let's just um, say for COVID per se, right? And all the sports teams are saying, hey, we're not going to have people come in person, to watch the games, right? Each one of those sports commissioners is their own autonomous unit. They don't report to each other, but now here they are working together, right? Because this project is to figure out a plan in which we can um, still conduct sports events without having people in the stadium, right? And so that's a concern for all of them because they all have that problem. So the best thing is to do is to have a network organization, and each of the units will have a representative that will, show up for them in that particular forum to, kind of discuss the things that they are concerned with because each organization has their own unique concerns and, problems and challenges. And so the issue at the core is to really figure out what's a good general approach so that everybody has get their needs and get their needs met. Okay, some contemporary issues, right, which are not as contemporary anymore, right? Virtual organization, which I kind of mentioned earlier. Okay, where we have companies that are really just operating on the computer, right, via Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something to that effect, right? And so the advantage to that is that there's low operating costs and high flexibility, but at the same time, you don't have the communication um, that you would have in a more of a non-virtual setting. Okay? It's great, if you have a lot of people that are spread out geographically, but you need to conduct meetings, you need to get still stuff done, and maybe once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks, you get together and discuss the issues at hand. And so that helps to have a virtual platform, um, but it's hard to control at times, okay? Because then you're relying on people to adhere to certain timelines and certain have certain deliverables ready to go, and people don't always meet the challenge of that. So, um, in many instances, the virtual organization is difficult and takes a certain person which to manage that. Right? Communities of practice are those groups of people who exercise, people who share expertise. Excuse me, group of people who share expertise and interest in a joint enterprise, informally bonding together. So these group of folks are really folks that they don't plan on working together, but because they have the same interest or the same goal in mind, right? They have no choice to kind of um, put them together to where they confirm with each other and saying, "Hey, you know what? This is what we're doing. What are you guys doing?" Right? Um, Trying to share best practices, even though they're not necessarily obligated to work together. It may be in their best interest to do so. Integrating employees, all right, which is another important aspect of organizational structure. Segmenting employees into different groups requires additional integrating mechanisms that facilitate coordination and communication among employees and groups. I cannot read today. Okay, so I apologize for that. Um, so we have direct contact, right? Um, the manager really, is talking to the employees and making sure that everything gets done and they are, working together to coordinate and solve problems. Okay. When you have a liaison role, you more or less have someone who is doing the talking and the coordinating for the group, right? Vice the actual manager or leader doing it themselves. Okay. And so you have kind of a proxy or a representative that is, there to defend, the things that you need defending. Task force is just that, right? Kind of a group of folks that are temporary in nature, and they're really trying to, uh, address a specific project or problem. Again, it's kind of like a project, as we talked about earlier, right, where the folks get together, they discuss their issues, and then they disband, right? Cross-functional team, right? Where you have people from different functional areas, right? And it's a permanent task force created to address specific problems or recurring needs. So really, the task force and the cross-functional team are the same thing. Is that task force is temporary, cross-functional is permanent, right? More of a this is staying and not going anywhere for the near future. So effects of restructuring on performance. Okay, um, if you restructure before because of poor performance, um, it can improve. You know, um, if the company struggling on performance and not doing well, restructuring might help. Um, but again, it may not. In some instances, it may not necessarily be that the structure is bad. It may just be that the people, certain departments are not that great. And so you have to kind of take, the core of your folks and maybe tuck them under another department that's related because you want that particular leader to have an impact on that group of folks. Okay. Um, when you talk about restructuring, you may more than likely result in a decrease in or downsizing in the staff. And so that tends to cause some stress and anxiety because people are not really sure if they are next to be downsized or to be let go. And so, because of that, instead of being fired, I'd rather resign or leave. And that looks better on my resume or for me to get another job. So it's better just to kind of leave out on my own terms than to be sent out when I'm not ready. All right. So here's some questions to think about. Okay. How do you think your career path might differ in a hierarchical or flat organization? If you start your own company selling iPhone apps, what organizational structure would you create? Right. All questions that are relevant at this moment, and because we have companies that deal with these issues every day on a day-to-day basis and have to figure out what's the best approach for me to have in order to, facilitate success for my company. Okay, so let's take a look at some organizational culture here. Okay, and so really, the culture of the organization makes a huge impact on, how successful the organization is, and really, how the people within the organization do their work, how long they stay, so it's into retention, even hiring. In many cases, recruiting, the culture is an important aspect of the recruiting process because people will ask, or will hear about the organizational culture or the reputation of the organization and how it treats its folks and use that as a factor as to whether or not they want to work for that company, right? So organizational culture is defined as shared values and norms, um, assumptions, right? That really help the members' attitudes and behavior, right, and guide them in a certain way in which they conform to the rules of the organization, right? And each organization has their own set of rules and set of ways that of behavior that's acceptable or not acceptable. Cultural values, right, are often taken for granted because they're implicit in nature, right? Talk to new members that they're socializing in the group. Take a long time to evolve and a long time to change. It can enhance organizational performance. So when you look at the cultural values, you're really looking at, well, how do we behave as a group? And what's acceptable? What's acceptable in a group of folks that are into, anime or goth or, hip hop or country, right? It's different. That's the biker community, right? Different from a group of folks that maybe are more into athletics and sports or academics and that kind of thing, right? So every group has their own cultural values and things that are accepted or not accepted within the group, right? The norms. And so those take a long time to really evolve because people have to embrace those. They have to acknowledge them, embrace them, and then practice them, right? And then once you've got someone or a group of folks thinking the way you want to think them to think, and you want to change it, it's going to take a while to break them of that. So you have to really apply some serious change management, um, and try to get the folks to have a different mindset or paradigm shift. Right? Um, Having a coaching bias can again enhance organizational performance. That's because everyone is kind of on the same sheet of music. If everyone's same sheet of music, and one condones a certain behavior, and then that really leads to support from other members, understanding of what each person is going through because they have personally gone through it. When I think about organizational culture and some of the norms and some of the social cues that occur when I was in the military, they're not things that necessarily, if you were in the military, that you would practice or that you would understand. And so our behavior was a little different as compared to the civilians, and the civilian may not necessarily do those things or condone those things, or they may do something different or think in a different way. Where in the military, our organizational culture, lent us to do certain things, to be more cognizant of the team or the group, vice my own individual preferences or my own individual desire. It was always for the betterment of the group as a whole, right? So now we look at the artifacts, right? And artifacts really, right, the physical manifestation of the culture, right? What are the things that characterize the culture? Okay, and but you can see it tangibly. You can touch it. You can measure it. You can. It's quantifiable in certain regards, right? And some these are just some of them, right? Awards, rituals, dress code is a big one where people can kind of tell what organization you belong to, what you're into by how you dress, okay? How people address each other, okay? Published list of organizational values, again, codified and people can see it as tangible, easily, readable, and the rituals that go with that, traditions, ceremonies, and that kind of thing, right? Expounds values and norms. The very values and norms explicitly stated by the organization. You have your enacted norms and values, right? The values and norms, exhibited based on observation of what actually goes on. Override espouse values and norms. Right? So you have those values and norms that are stated by the organization. We want you to act this way. We want you to do this. We want you to wear that. Right? The enacted values and norms are the things that actually go on. Okay, it's kind of like theory and application, or practitioner. There's a lot of theory, right, in academics. There's people that come up with these ideas and thoughts and say, okay, this sounds like it might be able to work, right? That's espouse, excuse me. But enacted is really what the practitioner does. That was out there and practices and do stuff, does a certain technique or process, and that's what is actually used, right? So many times you'll have lots of things that it's stated to do it a certain way, but how it's actually done is not that way. And so those, when enacted values and norms typically um, override espoused values and norms, because like espoused values and norms are really kind of the ideal, right? In a perfect world, this is the way I would want things to be, right? But what's really going on is the enacted values and norms. And you have your assumptions that organizational values that have become so taken for granted over time, they become the core of the company's culture, right? Just kind of the thing where this kind of leads to kind of a bad thing where we talk about like sexual harassment, or the way a certain group of people are treated, right, when they come into an organization. It's just expected. That's an assumption that because you're new, you're going to be buying dinner for the executives the first week. The first time we have a retreat, it's assumed that you will be unpacking all the bags or catering to your boss, because that's just the things that we do as a tradition, but they've been done for so long that it's taken for granted that it's going to happen without even, no one even saying it. It just, that's what rookies do. Rookies get lunch, they carry the bags for the senior guys, they that kind of thing. Newbies, and or if you're older, we assuming that you're going to expect certain people to act a certain way around you, right? There's four levels of culture, all right? So when you talk about the four levels of culture we just discussed, right? Artifacts, assumptions, espoused values, and the enacted values. And they're all kind of, intertwined with each other, of course, right? So you have your artifacts, which kind of align with your espoused values, right? You can see, the clothing, you can see the ceremony, you can see the rituals, right? And this is, tied into both espoused and enacted values, right? We have espoused values like and things we like to see that we want people to do, and then we have the things that people actually do, which we can see in the artifacts, right? If you're supposed to wear, a jacket with the patch on it, um, as a motorcycle rider member of a club, motorcycle club, you're a member of that, right? You're supposed to wear a patch on your jacket to signify the club, but you don't necessarily do that, right? Even though you're supposed to. Maybe you don't wear the patch exactly how they want it. Maybe you wear the patch on your arm, right? This is some assumptions that are taken for granted that, as a newbie, again, you're going to do certain things, right? We're not even going to ask, but it's attached to, associated with both enacted and espoused values. What people actually do, right? But a lot of it is based on some of the assumptions that they are are assuming is gonna that they need to do. And that's the thing about assumptions, because no one is actually talking about them. It just assumes, and people just think like, hey, this is what I have to do, without actually figuring out, is this an espoused value, right? Is this something that is written down and um, needs to be followed, or it's just what we do, and not necessarily what we have as an idea of what we want to happen. Right? So those are the four levels of culture. When you look at culture, some of the dimensions. Excuse me. Strong versus weak, positive versus negative. Right. So you have a strong. Let's see if it goes into any more detail. No, it does not. So you have a strong culture. You have a culture that whose um, artifacts, whose espoused values really resonate uh, within their community and also externally. You have a weak culture. It's not that it's necessarily weak in the sense that it's soft or can't manage itself. It's just the fact that it's basically relegated to that particular group, right? And it hasn't really gone out into you know the surrounding external environment and had an impact on the environment, on the other people and other communities around it, right? That culture hasn't seeped through to other factions or other, cultures, right? If it's positive, right, you have a positive culture, you have a negative culture. Positive culture could very well be, a group of, an Amish or something of that nature, right? Or people who are very um, cognizant of um, the earth and conservation and that kind of thing, right? There's a culture, there's a set of values that they follow and norms of recycling, eating, not eating any meat. Usually they're very much, vegetarians or vegans or pescatarians or something of that nature. But then you have your native cultures that, are regulated to um, poor or very bad connotations, such as motorcycle clubs, right? It's just an assumption that all motorcycle clubs are involved in drug activity and extortion and all this other stuff, right? It's just a matter of watching too much TV and buying into the hype of the culture. In many instances, the motorcycle clubs are not like that. They're usually positive organizations, but there is a negative connotation to that. There's a negative connotation to listening to, rap or hip hop sometimes, but it's part of the African American culture. But at the same time, it can have a positive and a negative connotation. And so you have to, really look at it and decide for yourself on the merits of, what is what makes sense to you. What would you consider, weak or positive or negative, right? Conflict culture, okay? Shared norms for managing conflict, active or passive, agreeable or disagreeable. So when you have shared norms, right, you basically are saying, I believe in the same thing you believe in. I'm gonna do, behave in the same way you behave in. And because of that, we're probably not going to have a lot of conflict because I'm going to be in concurrence with the way things are, the way we're behaving, the way that you want me to behave, right? Those espoused values and those enacted values will be in concert with each other, right? We also have, whether we're active or passive. Am I, more or less seeking out and being proactive and making sure that I follow the, enacted values, right? Am I passive in the sense that I'm going to, do the things that the organization wants me to do based on the culture, but at the same time, I'm not going to necessarily seek them out. I'm not going to make any super duper effort to be that person that does everything exactly how the organization wants me to do or fall in line with the culture 100%. Right? And that kind of goes along the lines of agreeable or disagreeable. Right. So some of the cultures are very agreeable, or are more mild mannered and even keeled and tempered. Some are not. Some are more, along the lines of you know, not seeking conflict, but very confrontational, or being ready for confrontation, or knowing to be a little more aggressive or um, divisive in nature, right? So you have different, conflicts when it comes to culture, right? And here we have a figure that kind of lays out the different intersections of disagreeable, agreeable as compared to active and passive. And you can tell you have a disagreeable and active, you have a dominating type culture. You have agreeable and active, you have collaborative type culture. If you have disagreeable and passive, you have passive aggressive type culture. And if you have agreeable and passive, you have avoidant. Right? And each one of these you can see in different areas where the culture is going to call for more of a type A person, or the people within that group may be more understanding and more open to discussion and trying to understand what's going on, and not necessarily wanting to cause any conflict, and trying to make sure that everybody understands that they're there for um, a team effort, right? And this is where it gets into kind of the culture of inclusion, where we try to increase the minority representation, right? And whether the qualifications and abilities of minorities are questioned, right? Again, nowadays we live in a world where diversity and inclusion are an important aspect of every organization, and every organization now is on board with having a diversity and inclusion officer, because it's important, because of our globalization and the way the world is going, and the way the markets and business is being conducted. It's no longer domestic. It's global. Okay, it's no more just international. Anyone, anywhere, any country can be a power player, right, and involved in the activities in a global landscape. And so there's a very much a push to have some level of inclusion of everyone and their ideas, no matter their lifestyle or what it is they believe in. When it comes down to business and trying to conduct business and make something happen, in many instances, those things will be put aside in the best interest of being successful and reaching the goal of the company, right? And so, but inclusion is important, because inclusion allows others to voice their opinion and their ideas, and those opinions and ideas, they just basically offer perspective that another person cannot garner. We cannot understand as males what it feels like to be pregnant, right? Just like women can't understand how it feels to be a man per se, right? And we don't understand how to be a female. We don't understand as an African American what it feels to be Caucasian. So when you include or have a culture of inclusion, you get all these things that come with it. Okay, so these things really help to enhance the company and the overall product and school of services, because they're offering different perspective and different ways how to do things, okay, and different approaches. And so that is always helpful in organization, because there's always more than one way. It's just about the perspective and the experience that you've had that someone else may not have had, and they have a better, you know, way in which to make certain things happen, right? When we're looking at influence in organizational culture, we kind of look at the scope, right? The scope of um, what goes on within the company, right? And intranets with a narrow scope can reinforce a culture. And when we talk about intranets, we're talking about networking groups, right? That contain information on a variety of topics. So we're not talking about the internet. We're talking about the intranets, or the networks within an organization. The people basically that make up these intranets, and within the organization, you have these groups of folks that have their own kind of subculture. Yeah, you hear that term a lot, subculture. Um, Openness to employee feedback and contributions. You definitely want that if you're trying to influence organizational culture. You want to have people feel like they can come in um, and have a say so, and really affect change in a way that is valuable and tangible. And, you know, being open to employee feedback um, really helps to kind of um, let employees feel valued, right? Um, you want to make sure that if you are running a company, you don't want to stifle people. Okay, you want people to feel like they can voice their opinion and not be fearful of losing their job or losing their position or facing some kind of repercussions. It doesn't work well. for the company, because at some point, eventually, the people are going to be hesitant to say anything, and that's going to be a detriment to the company. You got to update frequency. Okay, intranets that are rarely updated are not likely to influence the company's culture. Can reflect a culture that does not value employees' contribution, has poor internal communication, has poor attention to detail. So again, this goes back to being relevant, right? And the only way you're relevant is to understand what's going on externally, okay? And if you don't understand what's going on externally, or even internally, and you're not updating those practices or some of the behaviors or the characteristics of the group, you're not going to really move forward. Okay, you're not going to move forward because now everybody's kind of behind and doing things that are no longer effective. They were effective, but they're no longer effective. So you have to look at, what is really, going to propel the group forward. Um, the number of intranets, is also important. Right, this refers to whether there is just one company intranet or several, each serving different groups of employees. Okay, and then the use of symbols, stories, and ceremonies. Right. Each company has their own, things that they have as their symbol or their representation of the company. How, the CEO, the COO, and those folks, how they, present certain awards, or how they just conduct business, but how do they acknowledge success or failure? How do they get, the information across that they want to get across? Innovation, okay, process of creating, doing new things are introduced into the marketplace as products, processes, or services. Okay, types of innovation: radical innovation, system innovation, incremental innovation. And innovation is an extremely important aspect of the company. And for the most part nowadays, you want to have a lot of innovation. If you don't have a lot of innovation, you're probably going to get left behind, because not because your product or good or service is poor, just because the cost of doing business is no longer going to be in your favor, right? Because you're not keeping up with the new innovations that are really built to cut costs for companies, and companies will implement certain things because it will be a cost savings. Maybe not in the short term, but in the long run, it will be more advantageous to them to do that. Okay. So we look at radical innovation. We're talking about disruptive innovation, innovation that has a major breakthrough that change and creates new whole industries. Right. Sounds like the internet to me. Okay, or computer science at some degree. Okay, that's a radical innovation that just totally changed the landscape. Systems innovations, right, creates new functionality by assembling existing parts in new ways. You have incremental innovation, continuous and technical improvement, extends application, radical and system innovations. So each innovation is different in the sense that it impacts different areas of the organization. And you may have a radical innovation that impacts society as a whole, right? Apple really is kind of the leader of, radical innovation, right? With Steve Jobs, even Bill Gates with Microsoft, they had these very great ideas that really have changed our lives forever. You know, no one would imagine that you could have a portable phone, and then on top of that, a phone that does everything. You can live your whole life on the phone, okay, and not have to worry about going to the bank, or you can order food and do so many things. You can find your way home. I mean, there's so many things with the the phone, the cellular phone technology has impacted, right? So that's definitely a radical innovation, that cannot be really underestimated, right? Just saying that it was radical is probably understating that particular innovation. When we talk about innovation and culture, we start looking at new ventures, right? That require entrepreneurship and good management. Entrepreneurship, right? Um, that's entrepreneurship that takes place within the concept of a larger organization, right? So if we have a big company like Toyota, but we also have within Toyota, you have another division, right? Let's just say that Toyota owns Lexus. So that's an entrepreneurial activity that takes place within the context of Toyota, right? But Lexus belongs to Toyota, but on its own, Lexus is a pretty big entity, right? So you have to look at that. Entrepreneur's profile, the need for achievement, desire to assume responsibility, willing to take risks, and focus on concrete results. Right? When we look at an entrepreneur, someone who's venturing out on their own, they have all these qualities, right? They have this desire to be successful. They have the desire to attain certain goals. They want the responsibility. They want to feel the burden of leadership. Okay? They want to feel the burden of having to make tough decisions. They're willing to take risks. Okay? No one that's successful in life hasn't they taking great risk, okay? Because great risk comes great reward. You're not always going to, you know, um, make it. Sometimes you're going to fail, but there's risk in anything you do, right? The point is that you're willing to take that risk instead of just staying home and not doing anything. Instead, you go out, you venture on the world, and you take a chance not only on yourself but maybe on other people. But you take the risk, and if it fails, it fails. But you go back to the drawing board. If it does well, it does well. All right. So people or entrepreneurs are willing to take risks, and they focus on concrete results. Right? Entrepreneurs don't necessarily have time to not to be bad in their management of their resources, right? And so they have very focused and very tangible objectives that they're looking to reach. Corporate research, right, is another important aspect of a company, okay? Because corporate research supports other businesses within the company in providing new ways to do things, new technologies. It's really, the way that companies keep up with what's going on with competitors, and providing a new thing to their consumer, right? It's through innovation and doing corporate research, right? R&D, research and development. Most companies, depending on the size, again, have pretty decent, robust R&D departments because they understand that research and development is where we get new innovation, right? This is where we get new thoughts and ideas and new things that hit the market that may very well be a game changer. Okay, so if you have an R&D, pharmaceutical companies are probably the best example I could use of companies that have huge R&D departments, right? Pfizer, Merck, Eli Lilly, those companies, um, car companies, they're always looking for new innovation and new ways to do things, and the you know what's the best way we can leverage the technology that we have in order to better provide a good service or product to our customer and really cut costs, which leads to increased revenue, which leads to increased profit. All right. The only way you're gonna make more money is by making more money or reducing cost. That's it. Right. And the way you do that, one of the ways you do that is to, have a good research and development department that is coming up with new ideas and new innovations in which they can provide to the customer. They don't have to be grandiose in nature either, right? You have to keep that in mind. You can have an R&D department who comes up with very minor tweaks and changes to certain existing platforms, existing businesses um, that make the world of a difference to the consumer. And that can be the linchpin that attracts the consumer to, your product or keeps the consumer, loyal to your brand. All right, so elements of managing organizational culture, taking advantage of existing culture, teaching organizational culture, and changing organizational culture. So, when you take advantage of the existing culture, it's just much easier, faster if you go with the flow of the culture than try to come in and change it right away. Many CEOs, many leaders, they come in, they give it a while before they try to change anything, because you don't want to be seen as the person that's coming in and changing things, especially if things are working and they're efficient and they're productive. You don't want to be seen as that guy or gal that's coming to disrupt what's working, right? So it's better just to wait, um, and to go with the flow and let the employees have a chance to get to know you, and some of the thoughts and ideas that you have within the confines of the existing culture, right? And to some of the things that they're used to, and then come in and maybe change up a few things as far as the tradition and values. Right? Managers have to be aware and understand organizational values, right? And the managers must be cognizant of the fact that certain things happen that aren't necessarily, on their list of things to do, right? Not necessarily on the things that are explicitly listed out that must be done or must be conducted or done in a certain way, right? And so managers need to be, understand like, hey, this is how they do it. This is what they want to do. I'm gonna let them do it that way, just for the time being. Okay? And then managers can communicate their understanding to lower level managers, right? And that, hey, I'm going to, we're going to discuss certain things, and I'm going to let you know how I feel about, what's going on. You can also, teach the organizational culture, okay, organizational socialization, how you teach the employees about the culture, right, and passing that knowledge and understanding to others, right. You're putting them through a process of socialization where you're saying, hey, this is how I want things to be done, and you're repeating that over and over again until it becomes norm and becomes second nature, right. Organizational mechanisms, how do you do that, right? How do we do that? How do we do it through training? Do we do it through pamphlets? Do we do it through PowerPoint? Do we do it through application? How do we go about showing the organizational culture and employees that things are changing or that we'd like to institute a new, change in the culture? Right? And so here we have change organizational culture where we're managing symbols. Some of the things that maybe stand for the company or represent the company, you use those as tools in which to change the culture, right? Or you may change those particular tools. I mean those symbols themselves, and decide that you want to do something else. Let's say, for instance, for those familiar with the Washington Redskins, right? They're no longer Washington Redskins, now they're Washington football team, and they will eventually pick a permanent name. But right now they're Washington football team, and the hope is that with the change in the name, that the organization culture will change also. Although the culture probably isn't as toxic as the name would indicate, because the name is not necessarily appreciated by Native Americans, right? And it's something that they don't like, because the connotation of being Native American, being a redskin, it's a derogatory term, and so they don't necessarily like that, and so they want to get rid of that. They don't want the stories or the kind of the myths that are associated with the term redskin to be perpetuated any longer. And so as you move and you start to get rid of these symbols that represent the bad things about people, the things that people don't like, then you can start to change some of the culture and the thinking, um, in the organization, right? Um, Culture can be difficult to change when upper management inadvertently reverts to old behaviors. So this is where sometimes you'll hear people say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? If the leadership isn't willing to change and goes back to how they used to do business, then so is the organization, because they will look at the leadership and they will emulate those behaviors, right? And so if I see my boss doing it and my boss is saying one thing but doing another, then to me that indicates that my boss is not really trying to change anything. They're going back to their old stuff, and they like to stay that way. Right? The stability of change, new values and beliefs must be seen as stable and as influential as the old ones. If you want to make a change, it has to be seen as something that is going to stick and is going to be there for a while, and just as good or if not better than what we were doing before. And this is the real issue where people get familiar and they get very good at whatever they were doing, right? And how the organization was running. And now you want to come in and change it, and it may not be to their benefit. It may be to their detriment. So because it's a detriment, they may very well push against or fight the system and say, well, I don't want to change, right? I don't want the organization to change, the culture to change. And so I'm going to rebel against the culture. And because I'm scared of what I don't know. I'm scared of, losing my particular power. I'm scared of, people not liking me, whatever the case may be. Um, and so changing the value systems requires enormous effort because value systems tend to be self-reinforcing. Again, if you don't, push for certain things and getting the organization to change, then the organization is going to stay the same, right? And because it really is, up to you individually as to what you think is acceptable for organizational culture change, right? And so if you don't necessarily believe that there's a problem with the organization and how the organization is set up and some of the performance aspects of the organization, then you're not going to change. You're going to continue to do those things till you're forced to change. And at that point, you may very well leave the organization because you don't believe in the values and the norms anymore. You don't want to behave in that way, or you're going to conform and do what it is they ask, right? But again, looking at the things that the four aspects of culture, right, and how those affect the organization, right, really boils down to the leadership and how they behave. And if the leaders decide that they want to behave in a certain way, and they want the organization to be representative of a certain mindset or a certain um, um, stance, then they have to exhibit that. And then once they start to exhibit that and also hold people accountable to those particular uh, changes of behaviors, then you'll start seeing some change within your organization. Right? So take an opportunity to look at these two questions and think about them as a reflection point. And how would you approach you know culture and the organizational performance, and then the four conflict management cultures, right? Which one is the best fit for you? Okay. All right. So with that said, I'd like to make sure that everyone turns in all their work. We're in week 7 now, and so we're pretty much down to the home stretch. Got this week and next week, and we'll be done, and then you guys will move on to your next class, right? So make sure you have anything that's outstanding from last week, you get that in. At this point right now, we'll make sure to get everything graded and to you as soon as possible and close out this week with everything graded. And so you know where you stand. And if you have any questions or issues about your grade, you can reach out to me and we can discuss those things. But to this point right now, I think everyone that has participated and been active in the class, um, they've been really good work, and so I'm really happy with that. Okay, so make sure you read the notes too when I put them on there. They're just not for me to put them on there; they're for you to understand. And a lot of my grading is really about preparing you for the next level. If you decide to go get a master's or a doctorate, in citations and how to write and formatting and proofreading, those little simple things will really get you far and will help you to improve your writing tremendously. Right. So, with that said, I'm going to close out this session, and I will see you next week.